Congressman Case previously represented Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District, Windward Oahu North Shore, Central Oahu, Waianae, Neighbor Islands, and Northwestern Hawaiian Islands from 2002 to 2007. He also served as Hawaii's state representative from 1994 to 2002 in various positions, including majority leader. So Ed Case was born and raised in Hilo. He attended Waiakea and Keaukaha elementary schools in Hilo before graduating from Hawaii Preparatory Academy in Kamuela. He went on to graduate from Williams College in Massachusetts before working on Capitol Hill for 3 years as legislative assistant to U.S. Representative / Senator Spark Matsunaga of Hawaii. Following this first 3 DC tours, Congressman Case graduated from University of California, Hastings College of Law in San Francisco before returning to Hawaii to serve initially as law clerk to Hawaii Supreme Court Chief Justice William Richardson. He then joined the Honolulu-based law firm of Carl Smith Ball, Hawaii's oldest, where for 2 decades he practiced litigation, property, transactional, business, and government law, and rose from associate to partner and managing partner. Now, following his initial service as U.S. representative, Case practiced law for 7 years with the Honolulu firm of Bays, Lung, Rose, and Homa, where he also served as managing attorney. He then served for 5 years as Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer of Outrigger Enterprises Group, one of Hawaii's oldest hotel and resort companies with properties throughout Hawaii and the Pacific Asian Indian Ocean region. Case is married to Audrey Nakamura, a Sansei, 3rd generation from Japan, whose Hawaii roots are in Honolulu and Kona. Audrey was Ed's Hawaii prep classmate and have worked for 4 decades as a flight attendant with Pan American and United. They have 4 children, a daughter-in-law, and 2 grandchildren. In his spare time, Ed enjoys hiking and other outdoor water activities. Outdoor and water activities, especially sailing and body surfing. Ed and Audrey also enjoy travel and family activities with a renewed emphasis on babysitting. And with that, that ends my little introduction of Congressman Ed Case. So I'll hand it back to Arjun. Thank you.
Good to go? All right. Am I coming through, first of all?
Yes.
Am I good to go? Okay. Well, thank you so much for that really kind introduction. It's a very good introduction. I think I wrote it, it's a long one. So I'm sorry to take up all that time. It's great to be with you. It's actually great to be back with you. It's so good to see a bunch of the people that I've worked with over the years. Arjun, thank you so much for inviting me. Jim and Beth, I see you on the call. I remember you from always visiting my DC office, and just really good to spend a little time with you, and apologies that it cannot be in person. I thought what I'd do is just give you 10 or 15 minutes and then turn it over to you for questions. And so, just kind of as an overview, we are in the middle or past the middle of our 2-year 117th Congress. Congress operates in 2-year cycles. 117 means it's the 117th time since Congress started that we have had a 2-year cycle. And we're just getting into the 2nd year of that. Of course, since I got back to Congress in 2019, it's pretty much been a very, very difficult 3 years, especially the last 2 years in the middle of COVID-19 for all of our Hawaii and our country and our world. For starters, we have very, very challenging domestic and foreign policy issues that we all know about, that we all see every single day. Some of them are ongoing, some of them are projected, expected, and sometimes you just get issues that you never expected before they actually happened. And that leads us, of course, to the complication of COVID-19, which has dominated our world and my work over the last 2 years. And all of this occurs in a time of deepening polarization and division and anger, really in many cases throughout our country. And of course, it's all exacerbated by the fact that we're in the middle of an election year, and election years always bring out the worst in people somehow, it seems. And so it's obviously a difficult time in Washington, D.C. And everywhere else. And really my job, which is number one, to contribute to national leadership as a member of Congress under our Constitution. Number two, to help our Hawaii however I can on Capitol Hill and from the federal government perspective. And then number three, to help my individual constituents with your concerns, Social Security, veterans benefits, Medicare, immigration, a whole range of other issues. My job is to stay very much focused on the priorities that I have in my office in those areas, and really to navigate some pretty stormy waters to get things done wherever and however I can. One of the things about being in Congress is that you face every single issue on the planet in one way, shape, or form. Your portfolio is anything that comes before the United States Congress, given our position in the world and you know, our federal government. That includes every single issue of one way, shape, or form. And I'm sure that many of those are very critical issues to you, and they're all critical to me. But I do need, in terms of getting my work done, to prioritize and to make sure that I'm focused on the issues that are the most critical, the most important, the most broad reaching, and the most important to the most people. And so I'm just going to give you a quick sketch of 6 or 7 of those issues, none of which I suspect is going to be any surprise to you. So let's start with COVID-19. Clearly, we're in the second full year, coming up on 2-year mark of a true pandemic, a true crisis, a crisis that was certainly first and foremost a public health crisis. We have now lost some 930,000 of our own fellow citizens to COVID-19 in 2 years. An incredible number of people dead in our own country from COVID-19. Clearly, tremendous economic dislocation across our country, and of course, the social and community costs have been great as well. So we were all called to some extraordinary challenges and some extraordinary actions that were required to meet this pandemic. In Congress, the primary action we took was emergency assistance in several emergency assistance packages over the last couple of years that in the sum total were closing in on $6 trillion of emergency assistance. Now that's a huge amount of money by measurement. Consider that our usual annual federal discretionary spending is about $1.5 trillion. So we spent 4 years of total federal discretionary spending, and discretionary means everything other than the mandatory benefits like Social Security and veterans benefits, on basically stabilizing the country and our communities for COVID-19. Some 20 billion of that came here to Hawaii, which, as you know, was one of the most heavily impacted areas of our entire country, especially on the economic side, given our tourism industry and other industries. I think that we had to do that, but certainly it came at some cost to our federal deficits and federal debt. And it certainly has not seen us all the way out of the woods yet. And so although we see good news on the Omicron variant hopefully fading at this point internationally, nationally, and here in Hawaii, we're by no means out of the woods. We don't know whether the next variant is out there somewhere. We know that there are variants out there, but we don't know whether they will turn into being severe. So from my perspective, this is not the time to, let go of the focus we've had on COVID-19. We need to stay focused on it, again, public health wise, economic wise, and community wise, and see it through. And I think we can see it through as we continue to do that and not, loosen our focus on it. Related, of course, to COVID-19, economy and jobs has to continue to be a very top priority as well, nationally, and especially here in Hawaii. My focus, given Hawaii, has been to maintain the pillars of our local economy through some very difficult times, travel and tourism being number one, our military, of course, being number two, our defense activities in Hawaii are number two industry here, in addition to the contribution that they make to our country. It's an important economic contributor here, and they were, thank goodness, largely unaffected by COVID-19, because that was going to be necessary whether we did or didn't have COVID-19. And so it provided us some stability during a time in which our number one industry crashed. Nonetheless, it needed a lot of help to get through COVID-19 on a number of levels. And of course, construction and I would say small business are my other top priorities, especially given that small business is king here in Hawaii. The next priority that I have very much focused on, and we are all feeling the effects of this right now, is inflation and the escalating cost of living. You all know that we are now facing the most rapid increase in prices in 4 decades. And that is severely impacting our country. And it is particularly exacerbated here in Hawaii as the conditions that have given rise to inflation and the cost of living are really increased by our own local condition and really worsened. I think there's no one factor, there's no one cause for what we're facing today. In many cases, it's really a perfect storm of factors that are all inflationary in one way, shape, or form coming together to really provide a super inflated economy and price escalation right now, ranging from continued low interest rates to a higher supply of dollars that are out in our society from both actions by the Federal Reserve as well as our own spending on COVID-19. $6 trillion into an economy inside of a short period of time is gonna have some inflationary impact. And add to that as we're coming out of COVID-19, we're seeing significantly higher demand on services and especially on goods with a lower supply, which is a result of supply chain disruptions as well as labor shortages. So if you add that all up, you're going to have very significant and severe inflation, and that is in fact what we're facing right now. To some extent, some of these things need time still to work their way through our system. I think that's the consensus view of many of the folks that I listen to of all stripes to try to discern what's happening. I think one thing that is very sure about this is that the comments by some that this was going to be transitory and would basically start to fade away with COVID-19, that's not accurate. We're going to be with this for a while, and what we must do is to try to focus on the areas that we have the most control over. I would say that a couple of those areas are certainly supply chain disruptions, where we can certainly accelerate the loosening up of those supply chain disruptions, and then really just getting people back to work, because a fair bit of this is a shortage of labor and really people not being at work. So those are the primary areas on a national level. Now, I have ideas on the local level, but unfortunately for me, those are largely within the purview of our state and county governments. I'm happy to talk about them, but they're not things that I can directly impact. The next issue is infrastructure. I think we all know perfectly that we have neglected our basic infrastructure over decades, that it is deteriorating, that it is in many cases crumbling. I mean, I think we can all tell that just from driving wherever we're driving every single day. And by infrastructure, I'm referring to roads, bridges, sewers, water lines, ports, airports. All of those have just been neglected. And one of the things that we have sought at the federal level for quite a few years, if not decades at this point, is really a major new reinvestment by the federal government in infrastructure across our country, something akin to the highway efforts of the 50s and the 60s. And we have had other large infrastructure bills along the way where the feds have stepped in and said, look, we're going to help everybody to kind of up it across the country all at one time to kind of get into the next century. That has eluded us for a number of reasons, through Republican and Democratic presidents and Republican and Democratic Congresses and mixed presidents and Congresses. It's really been a very difficult item to achieve, but we finally did achieve it amazingly against all odds last year, and enacted a bipartisan infrastructure law, which was enacted into law in November at about $1.2 trillion over the next years, some $3 billion focused on Hawaii. I thought that that was a tremendous success and I worked very, very hard for that bill. Took incoming for it, as some people say, but I thought it was the right thing to do. And the challenge now is going to be to make sure we don't squander this opportunity across the country, to include Hawaii, because we desperately need that infrastructure reinvestment. And not just the traditional infrastructure, but one other area that I think is particularly important, which is our broadband infrastructure, where, a lot of our state is pretty well wired, but there are whole parts of our state, including right in urban Honolulu, where you would expect there to be a good broadband distribution network. But you know this, and I know that there are parts of Honolulu that simply don't have broadband. And so this is an opportunity for us to really go after the communications network that's going to be required for so many things, from distance learning to distance work to distance health, to just basic connectivity with our world. That's going to be fundamental to our economy and society here in Hawaii in the next generation. The another area that I focus on a great deal is foreign relations, because although some of our fellow citizens believe this is a time for isolationism, this is a time for the United States to withdraw from the rest of the world and not worry about the world. That's their business, and we've got our own problems. I'm not one of them. I believe that we need to be engaged in the world, both as a leader of the world, both as a partner of many, many countries in the world, as a country that believes in common values, believes in an international rules-based order that has kept the peace for 3 generations now. We need to be engaged out there in the world, and there's an obligation to do that, and there is a burden to be borne for that. And so we definitely see the rise of other countries, of other powers who have a directly contrary view of where they want to take the world, and they're part of the world. And of course, Russia and China are foremost. They're authoritarian. They don't share our values, and they're very practical, if I can put it that way, in terms of their pursuit of a different perspective on the world. And I don't think that that's the world that any of us want to live in. And so I focus very, very much on the challenges of China right here in our backyard, in our Indo-Pacific. China is really the #1 challenge we have, but of course, Russia, as we all know, in Ukraine and elsewhere, is definitely a huge challenge, and we face some very tough times in Ukraine, literally now and over the next days and weeks. I think that we are roughly doing what we should be doing, which is to keep our alliances, our partnerships, our relationships together, to support the right of a country like Ukraine, who is a sovereign country and wants to chart its own destiny as a democracy. I think that that's something that we should assure continues. And it's not just about Russia and Ukraine. It's also about what other countries like China will take from our responses to the Russian approach in Ukraine. So we'll see how this plays out, but it's definitely very much on my mind and Congress's mind. Every year, I deal with appropriations. That's my obligation on the Appropriations Committee, which is our funding committee, to figure out where we're going to spend that $1.5 trillion annually. And so easily a third to half of my total time every year is some way, shape, or form on appropriations, because of the significance of that committee's work, both to our country as well as to our Hawaii, because obviously where I can help our Hawaii in that area responsibly, I'm going to do it. And so we are very much focused on that right now as we go through the appropriation cycle. And then the final thing I'll note is, of course, Red Hill, which hard to believe was not at the top of really most of our minds 11 weeks ago. And yet it has been at the very, very top of my mind, my actions, and many of ours over the last 11 weeks as the tragic spills and actions post spills have unfolded. I have tried to focus in 3 basic areas here, along with everybody else. Number 1, helping those that have been most impacted by the Red Hill leaks, mainly are primarily military families who got sick, whose pets died, who are not in their homes. They can't send their children to school. They have businesses that are closed because of risks from the water. we need to take care of them. And we are, I think, doing that. The second area is the remediation of the actual leaks. What happened? Why did it happen? How do we clean it up? How do we prevent it from happening? Again, that's a huge job, and we're in the middle of that right now, and we don't have all of the answers. And then the third and equally important bucket, if I can put it that way, is what's the future of Red Hill after all of this is achieved? Is there a future for Red Hill as a bulk fuel storage facility? I've come to the conclusion that it should not have that future, that we need to find another way to satisfy legitimate national security needs in a way that does not continue to present an unacceptable risk to all of us who rely on that aquifer. And we all rely on it, whether we directly take our water from it or not. It is critical to many aspects of our life here in Hawaii. And I've been working with the military, who are engaged in the consideration of options along those lines. I think they're going to come up with solutions that do not compromise our national security, but do not continue the risk of Red Hill. That's all very, very expensive, and I'm very involved in that as well. Today, as a matter of fact, in the United States Senate, Congress passed a bill that we passed in the House about 10 days ago that appropriates directly $403 million to Red Hill, the initial actions that are necessary for Red Hill. That's in all honesty, not a drop in the bucket, but it's not a very significant amount of the total cost at the end of the day to get ourselves all the way through Red Hill to replacement facilities, presumably, and hopefully somewhere else. That's something that I'm very, very involved with from the Appropriations Committee's perspective, and it's been a good partnership, especially with Senator Schatz, who is on the Senate Appropriations Committee. So we tag team all the time, and we did that here. So those are my 7 major priorities right now. I would, clearly, hopefully be able to converse with you on a number of other priorities, including any that are on your list. A lot of this is on my website, and I invite you there. Before I kind of turn this back over to you, I do want to turn to one other subject, and that is your role as the peacekeeping club, which I really think is just tremendous. And I think that peace is an acquired skill in many ways, isn't it? Whether an approach that is a peaceful approach as an individual, or within a family, or within a business, or within a community, or within a country. These are things that don't just happen automatically. In fact, some people could argue that our natural innate tendencies are not towards peace; they're in the other direction. And yet, what makes us human is the ability to move towards peace and believe that peace is the better way overall. I wanted to just tell you a little bit. I actually got involved in this as a very, very young man coming out of college, when I went to work for Spark Matsunaga, as reflected in my biography. Spark Matsunaga was an interesting man, and one of the things he believed was, and he was a World War II veteran, battle scarred and battle tested, so he had seen war, and he said, well, if we can have a Department of War, the Department of Defense, why can't we have a Department of Peace devoted to the other side of the equation? And he actually was introducing bills when I worked for him in the 70s to create a U.S. Department of Peace. He was actually laughed at the time for that. Everybody thought, well, that's kind of a weird thing, but he persevered and eventually won the day. Congress passed a U.S. Department of Peace in the 90s, as I recall. And today that exists in Washington, D.C. as the Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. It's also called the U.S. Peace Institute. It's a beautiful facility. It's got world-class scholars. It gets involved in the toughest conflicts, the toughest issues around our country. It takes them on. It's regarded as a safe place to have these discussions internationally. I myself have had the privilege of speaking and presenting within the Peace Institute on a number of occasions. And so that's an example of our government actually embracing the role of peace in a systematic, studied way that I think you might want to check out. And I'm certainly happy to get you information on that if you'd like to study and get involved with it as a club on a broader level. The other area, and by the way, there's as the UH people know, there's also a related adjunct institute right here in Hawaii at the University of Hawaii that is also in honor of Spark Matsunaga. We support the Peace Institute at the range of about $45 million a year. In my appropriations committee, I work very hard to make sure they get that support every year. We also have outstanding institutions right here in Hawaii that are dedicated in so many words to peace. The number one that I would cite for you, of course, is the East-West Center, which has been amongst us for 60 years already, dedicated to exchange between East and West. But ultimately, the belief of the center, as is my belief, and I believe yours, is that exchange fosters peace. And so as we can forward those efforts and communicate and understand differences, we also move ourselves towards peace. I also support the East-West Center in my appropriations work, and they have a brand new president in former General Suzanne Vargas-Lum, who's I think is going to take that East-West Center to great places. We also have the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies at Fort DeRussy, which is a Department of Defense funded facility, but ultimately they do also seek communication that leads to peaceful outcomes as opposed to, military outcomes. And I similarly try to support them. So these are great institutions right here in Hawaii. And if you're interested, I would encourage the club to go out and check them out. I'm sure they would be happy to show you around, to talk to you about peace in a broader context. I certainly am happy to introduce you to them if you'd like me to do that. So there's a quick run through my life in a very short period of time. Just some of the issues. What I want and need and welcome from you is partnership and communication. I need to stay very close to my community back home. Half the year I'm 5,000 miles away from here and making kind of quick decisions or not so quick decisions, but nonetheless decisions 5,000 miles away. And so I need to have my lines of communication, my supply lines very, very firm at all times. And that's why I appreciate the opportunity to have these kinds of discussions, to prompt your own thoughts and to invite your own comments and to ask for your own areas of input and assistance. I appreciate your own service. Rotary is a fantastic organization. I don't know how many times I've spoken to Rotaries across our state. I think at one point I could have claimed that I had actually spoken and attended every single one of them across the state. Although that's been a while since I could claim that, but nonetheless, every opportunity is special to me. And I would refer you again to case.house.gov, which is my website, and that's the easiest way to find out more information about me and what I'm up to and what Congress is up to, and to contact us. And so with that, I as usual talked a little too long and left a little too little time for questions, but back over to you for however you want to take it in the remainder of our time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Representative Case. We have just a few questions from the floor here. The first one is with respect to inflation and something that affects all aspects of the industry. What is the Congress prepared to do to restore our energy independence, which we enjoyed just a couple years ago?
Well, we are actually in a much broader discussion about the areas where we have ceded too much dependence overseas, where we have ceded too much control overseas, and where we have ceded the possibility of leverage overseas. That came in spades in COVID-19, especially as we saw that critical supplies were dependent upon China, and that just got amplified and the spotlight shone on it. And energy is certainly one of those areas. We were well on our way to energy independence, and in fact, we in areas such as natural gas and other energy-related issues, we have turned from real dependence to a position of enviable ability to export, to turn it into an export industry while satisfying our own needs. And I don't think we want to reverse all of that. I think that in fact, I think what we want to do is to accelerate it. And so I think we're on the right track. I think there's obviously issues that come before Congress periodically that challenge our basic assumptions and challenge us to find the right policies to advance that goal. But I think we are fairly in common in terms of what the goal ought to be. So I think we're doing the things that we need to do in terms of making sure that we can continue in the direction we have been for the last 15, 20 years.
Okay, thank you. And now another question with respect to inflation. In regards to inflation and possible solutions, has there ever been any discussion about temporary or changing the Merchant Marines Act of 1920, the Jones Act, in order to provide relief to Hawaii, in Hawaii?
Yes, because I've led that discussion. I concluded back in my state legislative days, and so now we're talking about 25 years ago, when I first became aware of the Jones Act and its impact on Hawaii. I concluded it was a bad idea for Hawaii. The Jones Act is the federal law, which is now 122 years old. I'm sorry, 102 years old. That requires all shipping between U.S. ports to be on U.S. flagged carriers, and that's not a bad idea if we've got a lot of U.S. flagged carriers. But our Jones Act fleet now is down to under 100 Jones Act carriers to service the entire country. And so what that does is to create a virtual monopoly on shipping lanes around the country, with a very short supply side of it. So, classic economics, high demand, low supply equals high prices. And that's what's happened in spades with Hawaii, because in other parts of our country, if the prices get too high, then people can turn to trucks and trains and buses, and to some extent airplanes. And we don't have that option here in Hawaii. So I have introduced legislation in Congress to modify the Jones Act as it affects the insular parts of our country. Now, if the mainland wants to deal with the Jones Act, at one point I thought it was bad for the entire country, but I've decided to fight this fight on a more defined field. And so my fight is the areas where it particularly impacts our state. And then there's no doubt about the actual result of the Jones Act in our state. And the basic statement by the Jones Act folks is, well, yes, we admit that there are much higher prices, but we trade that against stability. And I think it's a false choice. I think we can have stability in our shipping at lower prices if our supply side of shipping is much greater. And so that's what I'm doing in Congress. Now, it's a lonely fight, to be honest with you, because it's a very powerful lobby, and a lot of people are getting very, very wealthy off the Jones Act, as most people do when government sponsors a monopoly.
Okay, thank you. I just have one more question then from the floor, and I don't think we have any from outside there, but you endorse the idea of peace, and you also mentioned Ukraine as a sovereign nation whose borders define sovereignty. What do you believe needs to be done about the southern border of the United States?
Well, I think that we have not secured our southern border, and so in all honesty, I don't subscribe to the open or relatively open border policy of even some of my own colleagues. I believe in a comprehensive immigration reform, meaning that we've got three basic buckets that we have to reform in what is clearly a broken immigration system. The first is border security. I think if a country cannot control the movement across its borders, it loses a fair bit of its sovereignty in that process. Now, that doesn't mean I don't believe in substantially restricting immigration. So I'm not in the camp of no more immigration into our country. I believe immigration's been good for our country, and I believe immigration should occur, but I want it to occur according to what we decide, on the terms that we decide, as opposed to being fait accompli, that unenforced leads to what we have today, which is 10+ million or more folks that are in our country illegally. And so I definitely believe in stronger border security. And I think there's several measures that can be taken, all of which are going to be necessary in some way, shape, or form to restore some border security.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions that just came in. This is a quick one, just a yes, no, if that's possible for a representative.
It's not possible for me at all. No.
But as you know, we have a couple of members here that are from the Med Shed of Hawaii. Are you familiar at all with the Men's Shed movement? I believe it started in Australia and now has migrated across the world. But the Men's Shed, which is for older men, a way for older men to get together and social. What? What? Or shoulder to, it's also called shoulder to shoulder.
I have to say no. I'm curious. So I would love to. I guess the answer is no. How about that?
Well, that's great. And I encourage whoever asks a question and is concerned, call, just send an email to Representative Case office and let him know so he can do something there. And then the last one that came in, is this, I guess, with respect to COVID. Dr. Fauci was responsible for gain of function research and was untruthful to conscience. What is going to be done about Dr. Fauci?
I respect the views of whoever asked that question, but I have personally found no reason to doubt Dr. Fauci's evaluation on scientific basis and his basic plain talk. I think that's been a stable part of COVID. Now, one can disagree with him on the science. One can disagree with him on his conclusions about what to do about the science. But I don't have, I personally, with respect, do not have an issue with Dr. Fauci's, basic credibility or motivations. I think. And I'd be happy to explain that further. I've had this comment to me and I've explained it at greater depth than I just did. But I don't think Dr. Fauci is the problem here.
Okay, thank you, Representative Case, for joining us and answering the questions. And I think I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Arjun to wrap it up. So aloha.
Aloha. Thank you.